thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me to do this. I hope that what we cover today will be useful and helpful to you as transcribers and teachers. I started my Braille career, I guess I didn't write up an introduction to myself, back in 1984. I've been Brailing for nearly 40 years now, and I have my certification in literary and Nemeth, and then UEB and UEB technical, and I also have my instructor certification. So I have presented over the years many times with Toronto CNIB conferences that have been held in the past, and attended many workshops, been totally interested in the Braille world, and mostly from the perspective of meeting the needs of the students. That's been my passion all these years as a transcriber, is to get the material on the students' desks and in their hands so that they can improve their literacy in this world. So that's pretty much all there is to know about me. I work from home as a contractor, but I've worked primarily all these years with the alternate format library for Saskatchewan Ministry of Education. I'm also working a little bit right now with NELS, doing some projects for them. And that's very exciting because there's a lot of early literacy books that we're doing, print Braille, Twin Vision in that. So without any further ado, we'll get right into it. I just want to mention a few general things before we get into the PowerPoint. Remember that these, like any other things with Braille, are guidelines, and there's going to be options for doing it differently. But these guidelines are designed to just give directives that will help you create early literacy material while staying in line with Braille formats, so that there's the minimal amount of change as the student progresses into higher level mathematics or literary in different grades. It gives direction in many different areas that we'll see, and covers an overview of as many different scenarios as we could come up with. Okay. So because we're talking this morning with you as transcribers and as TVIs and perhaps even classroom teachers, I want to just say that sometimes the situation for a transcriber is different than in a classroom setting, because in a classroom setting, you actually have a little more flexibility than we do as transcribers. As transcribers, we set up rules and guidelines so that we are consistent, so that if the book is cataloged and goes for multiple use, at least it's the same all the way through, and students can find their way easily through it. In the classroom setting, for a piece of work that you're only going to have that one student do, sometimes you can alter that a little bit to customize it for the student. So there is some flexibility there, but specifically for transcribers, we need to be consistent, and we need to follow a pattern that would be make sense for the student no matter where the book goes. All right, so we'll see some of that as we go along. Okay, so of course, formats refers to how to put something on a page. How do we place the headings? How do we space it? What do we do with type forms, pictures, puzzles, spatial arrangements, and all those kinds of things? So we're going to look at all of those areas today. And before I even start into the PowerPoint, I have to apologize if there is an error. I'm sorry. I've proofed it many times, but still, as many times as you do, it seems like something pops up. So I apologize for any errors we may find in this document as we go along. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we'll get right into the PowerPoint presentation here. I can get it to come up properly. There we go. No, that's not mine. Just a minute. Let me see this. We got Oh, there, I had clicked on the wrong one. Sorry. First mistake. There we go. That looks better. All right. So the first thing we're going to look at here is the guidelines. And I've gone through the guideline at a time and inserted examples, notes, and things like that. So hopefully what we see, you can always go back to the official guidelines and fill in the blanks that I didn't. But for physical page attributes, now our first guideline talks about page size. Standard Braille paper, as you know, is 11.5 by 11 for most students. Kindergarten, first grade, you can use 8.5 by 11, landscape or vertical, whichever works best for the student. And you can even use smaller sheets if you have a young student that, for small hands and that, you can customize that in the classroom. As a transcriber, we wouldn't go beyond the 8.5 by 11 for the smallest size for production of anything that will be cataloged and sent out to schools. But in-house, you may be able to use smaller ones just for your individual purposes. Our volume size for transcribers is 50 pages maximum, kindergarten right through third grade. And that again is to accommodate the small hands and the small student. It's pretty hard for a 6-year-old student to handle a 200-page or 100-page volume of Braille. Okay, break it logical places in the text. Some of this material you'll probably be familiar with doing higher level transcription as well, but the rules are the same. The preferred breaks are after a chapter, a unit, a section, any place that is the most logical. If you can't break there, then try to break just at the end of a logical set of information. Workbooks, we recommend that you break at a new activity for workbooks and activity sheets, and that only makes sense. If you start a new activity on a new Braille page, then the student can follow it quite easily that way. All right, now we're going to talk a lot about spacing, and we're going to see a lot of different examples of spacing. Kindergarten to first grade is double spaced, except for these primary areas. Now, again, there might be an exception where you feel it has to be single spaced. Use your professional judgment when formatting and doing that sort of thing. But primarily, of course, preliminary pages are single spaced because they're designed more for the teacher and than the student, except for the special symbols page, the student would refer to that. Puzzles, there's many cases where the puzzles have to be single spaced, and we'll see those coming up. Spatial problems in math, of course, would be single spaced. Titles of tactile graphics, and we'll see that in action a little bit later. Charts and tables, between the column heading and the separation line in charts and tables. Alphabetic page numbers, and then after the top box line and before the bottom top box line. We'll see all those in action as we go through the document today. All right, Guideline 2 talks about transcriber generated pages, and I think most of you will be familiar with this as well, but we'll see some of it in action. That includes the title page, subsequent title page, special symbols page, and the transcriber's note pages. Okay, and these are provided in each volume. So these are just samples of what you would see. So this is my special symbols page, and we start with the dot locator that is used in the list, and then list the symbols. The symbols are listed in Braille order, and that follows the UEB guidelines. And of course, you include only what's in that particular volume. So what you see happening on this page and others is specific to my document. These things are found in this particular document, but you would just list the ones found in the volume that you're working with, okay? We don't need the great big long list of ones that the student wouldn't be using in that volume, because when he moves then on to another volume of Braille, he's going to have perhaps a different set of special symbols, and then it only focuses on those that he needs.
Bonnie, it's Adam. Could I interrupt for just a quick second?
Yep.
Could you hit from current slide in the top left of your screen just
Oh,
so that we
yes,
can
let's
see?
not, yes, just a minute. Right, there we go. That looks better. You don't need to see what's on the side there.
Perfect. Thank you, Bonnie. Appreciate it.
All right, I always forget to do that, sorry. Okay, so then the next thing that we're looking at is the transcriber's note page. Now, the first thing that we look at here is the first paragraph, of course, lists the standard things that we would put on that transcriber's note page, which tells what rule books or code books, guidelines we're using to complete the transcription. And of course, the primary ones are the rules for Unified English Braille, guidelines for the early transcription of materials, so you would list that one. The Braille formats, because of course the ELMP guidelines correlate with both the UEB code and the Braille formats. And then tactile graphics, if there are any used in your Braille document. After that, then you would list the guidelines regarding the technical materials or the Nemeth code, if that applies to the book that you're transcribing. And then following that, all the things that are important to list that are happening in that volume that you're working on. So these things that you see here, and I keep losing my mouse, are things that will show up in our document as we go through it. We'll be using those things. Okay, and then now, where's my, there we go. This is a continuation. I just put it into 2 slides, but this is a continuation of my transcriber's note page. And again, you'll see all these things are lists of things that are showing up in the document as we go through it. So any transcriber's note that is in the volume will be transferred and put on the transcriber's note page. So on this slide, you're seeing a sentence that says words with crossed out letters are uncontracted, then repeated with a hyphen substituted for the crossed out letter. The contracted word is brailled after the uncontracted word. So we're going to see that happening on a specific page in our volume. And all of these, this one in particular, transcriber's notes that appear in this volume are listed below in I'm going to have to close off, Adam. I can't see my whole screen here. They're listed that appear in the pages here. I'll just look at my other note here. Okay, so what we've done then for the benefit of the teacher is we've said on page A2, there happens to be a transcriber's note that has picture and it has spider, and then it has it uncontracted and contracted. It has a picture of a spoon and has a picture of a swing. And so those things are found on this particular page in the document, okay? And so on with these other ones. These are the pages that they're found on. This is the wording that the transcriber's note has in it. This is done, and the print copy of this would be given to the teacher so that if they need some cross-reference as to what's happening in the student material, they can quickly look back and see it transcribed. So, okay, so just to move on then, some more about transcriber's notes. Of course, they're used to indicate and explain omissions, change in format, or additions to the print. They're used to indicate an interruption of text, describe pictures or diagrams, list keys, or indicate an uncommon use of a Braille symbol, one that the student might not be familiar with. You can explain it. That's just a few of the things that you would include as a transcriber's note. Okay, we're going to see all this in action today as we go through. Just for general reference and reminder, a transcriber's note, of course, begins in cell 7 with runovers in 5, and it's preceded and followed by the transcriber's note indicator. For kindergarten grade 1, limit the note to as few words as possible, and you'll see that coming up. And then also try at any level to write the notes in the language that reflects the grade level so that we're not using vocabulary that's beyond the student. Okay, just going to show you a couple examples of this. Here we have a kindergarten and first grade, and the transcriber's note might just say picture. And sometimes that's all the student needs to know. If he knows there's a picture there, he can ask. And there was quite a discussion. I'll just share this little story with you. When we were creating the document, there was a big discussion about how much do we tell the Braille reading student to do and how much do we leave it up to their initiative to do. And some of our Braille reading people that were contributing to the document said, when I was a kid in school, I just needed to know there was something there, and leave it up to me to ask. Don't tell me to go ask the teacher, because we had actually originally had a place where we said, ask the teacher or ask for help. And the Braille readers said, nah, don't do that to us. Don't give us that kind of instruction. Let us take the initiative to do that. Just tell us what's going on the page and we'll take care of the rest. And we appreciated that, because as sighted people, we often get an incorrect perception of how things should be handled by someone that doesn't have that sight. And so we changed it and we said, okay, we're just going to tell the student there's a picture there and they can handle it the way that they feel they want to. Some may just not care and pass over it. Others may be curious and want to ask, and they will take that initiative. We also said that you could say the picture omitted. Now this is still kindergarten grade 1, so we're trying to keep it at few words. So we've just got 2 words there. And that gives them a clue too then that we haven't done something with that picture, and they can take the initiative to inquire. Second and third grades, we can include transcribers' notes more often if we need to, but still keep them to a minimum. This one just says pictures are described. So that just tells the student that it was a picture in print and they're getting the word, okay? Or pictures to be identified by name are described. So then they know that something has to happen with that and they need to work with it, okay? Those are just examples. You can use your own wording. Now, as I just mentioned earlier, there are ink pages, and this is a print page for the benefit of the teacher, these are the ones that we would include in the volume. Always the print, there's a print copy of the title page in every volume of Braille. This is just really for the benefit of ease of reading, so the teacher knows what the book is, where to store it, or how to find it and locate it easily. Because it gives important information for the teacher as well. We also recommend for early literacy materials to make a copy of the teacher's reference pages, and that includes the special symbols and the transcriber's note pages. And again, that's just a quick and easy reference. If you come across something in the volume, you need to refer to it and know what it says to help the student. You've got a print copy at the beginning. When we get into higher grades, we tend not to do that, but it's still acceptable at any level to include print copies of those. And different agencies will have different recommendations on how they want to handle that. All right, so now we're up to the nitty-gritty of things. We're going to start into type form indicators. And this one does give a little bit of problem at times, because print loves to use type form indicators, and especially with our technology and the programs that are out there, they can create all kinds of wonderful, colorful things on a page, and we have to say, what do we do? Okay. At kindergarten, we just eliminate all font indicators. It's just too much for them. And so we just say on the transcriber's note page that all font attributes have been omitted, so that the teacher knows that we can't deal with that at a kindergarten level. At first grade, we still evaluate it and use as few as possible. If we can eliminate them, we eliminate them. We only use what's necessary. And again, the main reason for that is, which we'll see coming up in just a couple minutes, is that a type form indicator changes the shape of a word. Okay, so if you're just teaching the student to read and they're learning vocabulary words, for example, and we put them in italics or bold, we're now changing the shape, and that can be problematic for a young student just learning. So we try to eliminate it. Now, if we have to, we can use them. And sometimes there's two fonts, italics and bold, for example. Italics isn't used as much in early literacy actually as color is. But if there were two, we could eliminate one of them and just use the italics to indicate the two fonts if it's not necessary to distinguish between the two. So you have to really scrutinize your material and say, do I need that? Is it needed? And then make that decision. Okay. So now we're going to swing into some examples here. Now, what I've done with these examples is I've repeated on each slide, I've repeated the print copy so we don't need to flip back and forth as we're talking about it or remember what it looked like. So I just did that deliberately as ease of looking at the Braille, okay? So what this page has, and this is a kindergarten or grade 1 level book, this first heading at the top, which says printing letters, sounds, and words, was in the whole unit, the whole volume that I would be putting together. So I used it as a running head. Okay. Now, the reason I've inserted some of these running heads is just to show you the relationship between running heads and headings that follow. Okay. So I treated this like a running head on line 1. Then because it's kindergarten grade 1, it's double spaced. Okay. So we have 2 blank lines before the centered heading, long vowel sounds, 2 blank lines after the centered heading, and then we get into the paragraph. The letters A, E, I, O, and U are vowels, and you can see that those letters are blue. And in the next sentence, the long vowel is in blue. When it says long vowel sounds say their own name. I eliminated that blue, okay? We did not represent that because we felt that, well, first of all, it's kindergarten and we don't reflect type form. And also, if you look at the material, it's not 100% necessary because the letter sign has to be used for the appropriate letters for E and U. And so therefore that would clarify those. The A, I, and O, of course, stand alone. And the word long vowel in the sentence says what it means. So it doesn't really need to be bolded or in blue type or anything like that. And then we go down now, for example, there's 2 blank lines left because this is an example. So it's in a different format. Your for example is indented. But again, long A has not been, the type form has not been reflected. It's been omitted. The word snake is in bold and the letter A within the word snake is in blue. But we did not do anything unusual with that either because the sentence explains what's going on. Okay. Now, following that, we have put an X on the pictures that have the same long vowel sound as the letter in that row. That's a set of instructions or directions. So we have 2 blank lines before that, okay? Because we're following, normally directions have a blank line before them. So this case, they would have 2. And I might go on, I might just comment, or it might be coming up later. Generally speaking, my rule of thumb is if you're in kindergarten grade 1 work that is double spaced, then wherever there's a single space in print, you would naturally put a double space in the double spaced work. Okay, so if you've got 1 blank line before a centered heading in regular format, you would have 2 in the double spaced material. All right, so continuing on down now, line 19, we start with the list of things with the picture. So we've got the letter A, and we've got cake, skate, frog, and rake, and we've got those are in pictures. We substituted the words for those pictures. Now we know that at kindergarten level, the student might not be able to read those words yet, but they might be able to find the letter A within those words, and they might just be getting assistance as well with doing them. So it's hard to know exactly what to do, but we did replace the pictures with words. We hope that in the classroom situation, the teacher or the assistant that's helping the student will be able to work with that in a sensible way. We also treated this whole thing here as a horizontal list. So each one of these words has 2 blank cells in between them. And when you're doing a horizontal list, that's the format for doing that. And we also use the horizontal list just to give a little bit more space. If the student is learning these words and their hands are small and they're just learning to track, it gives them a little more room for tracking those things. Okay, so now this example, again, I used the letters and sounds as a running head. And then the first thing is just the S and the uppercase and lowercase s, and then it says print S and S in the 2. Now you've got red type, you've got bold, you've got gray type in that beginning. This might be assignment that a teacher would say, we can't do it. It's tracing letters, and there's other examples of where you trace letters that have to be omitted. We just simply can't do them. But if you decided you could do this, and this is the reason why I showed this, this perhaps could be done in a sensible way for the student, in that what we're doing here is we've got letter capital S and the small s as shown in print, and then we've got print capital S and small s, period. So we've copied that sentence. Then I've inserted here the indicator for use, and I've taken the letter signs away so that now the student is actually going to see the capital S as they would braille it as a capital S. Okay, and they see the regular S, the lowercase s as S's, and they could then practice brailing that letter S on that piece of paper. So that gives them a bit of an opportunity to do that activity, even though it was a tracing one for the sighted student. Then the second half of this page says, look at the pictures, print the beginning letter on each word, read the word. Okay, so we have the instructions at the top, and it's double spaced. They have the word star. So we've just, and they've done that one, so we just brailled the word star, and we followed it with the contracted form. So it's uncontracted and contracted. Okay, then the rest of them where they're supposed to fill in the blank, we did use a transcriber's note, and this one is, as you saw, appeared on the transcriber's note page. It says picture, spider, and then we uncontracted it and we contracted it. And then below that, remember this is double spaced, it's grade 1. We put in the dash for the line that they would have here because they needed some indication, and brailled the rest of the word uncontracted. Okay, and so then we went down here and we've got the next one. We've got a transcriber's note saying spoon, and we've done the same thing, and then picture of the swing. Okay, and the swing is uncontracted and contracted again. So that is an option for how you could handle that without having to actually omit the activity. And hopefully for the student, it would be useful enough that they could glean some benefit from it. Okay, now we're going to look at a couple here that are in 2nd and 3rd grades. The font attributes can be used. Evaluate and use as few as possible, keep them to a minimum if possible. Okay, also with print, colors and highlighting, the same rule applies. Evaluate and eliminate if you can, cut it back to a minimum if necessary to reflect color or highlighting, because they're a little bit different than the other font attributes. Follow the UEB guidelines, and it's well outlined there for you. Okay, so now let's look at a page here that's got quite a bit of stuff on it. This is grade 2, so it's a little complicated. And there's options here that you can do. So let's see what our options are. First of all, this could have been a grade 1. It happened to be in a grade 2 book, but it also could have been a grade 1, in which case you would just double space it appropriately. This is single spaced because we treated it as the grade 2. The opening is just a paragraph. Sue and Luke are playing flutes, so that's just indented. Then we have the material that was in the box. So this from lines 3 to 7 are the material in the yellow box. Now I didn't retain the box because it's early literacy and that could be just clutter, but you have the possibility of keeping the box if you want. If you feel the box is necessary, or if you're doing, this isn't just a single worksheet and you're doing a whole volume of Braille and each page is similar in style, that it has the yellow box, you feel it's necessary to retain that box for the student or the teacher, yes, you can do that. Okay, so those two options are perfectly okay. In this case, I didn't retain it. And if you look down through, I'll see if I can find it here on line 6, well, on line 5 and 6, there's the letter U is in bold. And then on the last line, the words Sue, Luke, and flutes are in bold. I did not retain those, again, because I didn't feel that they were necessary. The explanation treated it fine, and the letter U has a grade 1 indicator in front of it, so it is identified. So I didn't retain. Because it's grade 2, you could have, but I still recommend in grade 2 and 3 early literacy, eliminate it if you can. Okay. So that box material was there. I put it first because it related to what was happening in the activity. So it came first. Then I have my centered heading. Here's what to do. And you see this, the one blank line before and after, because we're in regular format now. And then we have the directions, circle the answer, yes and or no. And I did not retain the bold there. I felt that the instructions explained it well enough what they needed to do. And then circle the long U. And again, it has the grade 1 indicator. Interesting enough, they used a capital U there. So we have a capital U there as well. And then the sentences follow. The answers, yes and no, I put below. These blank lines do not need to be repeated. There's no need for them. We did put the answers below. We indented them to cell 3. But because this is single space material, we still double spaced the activity part because they have to circle. And so to give the student room to circle, we double spaced. So there's an example of where in single spaced work, you would actually double space. If the student is going to be using this activity sheet to actually write on, we provide them with that. Now, as a transcriber, you often may not know if it's going to be used as a separate consumable activity sheet. Usually when you're transcribing that, your instructions should be clear enough that it's either bound or it's unbound. And that would tell you that if it's unbound, then they're going to use them and consume the material. If it's a bound worksheet where they're going to have to use a separate sheet of paper, then your formatting may vary, because you wouldn't have to include it double spaced if they're just going to read it and answer on another sheet of some kind. But at the early literacy level, I think mostly they would use the activity sheets because the student isn't that fluent perhaps with using, with brailing on another piece of paper. So we're assuming in this case that these activity sheets are being consumed by the student. All right.
Bonnie, it's Adam.
So,
Could we just pop in, because I just was kind of waiting for a natural break to see if we had any questions.
Okay.
So could we take maybe about 5 minutes? If anyone has any questions, please use the little hands up feature just so that we know you have a question. And we'll just create a little space and time for that. Okay. Hearing and seeing none. Bonnie, I guess we'll go right into to line spacing.
Okay, just absorbing all the information.
Oh, you better believe it. All right, thank you. Oh, hang on. Here's a question in the chat from Tara.
Okay.
Do you always put instructions in cell 5?
Yes, that follows formats, principles of print to braille. Instructions are in cell 5 and they're blocked. Okay, yes.
Okay. Okay, here's a question from Daphne. Okay, everybody's making me work for it today here, Bonnie.
There you go.
All right. On the long vowel worksheet for letter E, the word leaf used the contracted EA symbol. Would you consider providing the uncontracted form as you did on the next page for words where the initial S was missing?
Okay. That could be uncontracted. If you, this is a kindergarten grade 1. Yes, you could use uncontracted braille there if you felt it was necessary. What you would do is you would make the decision to uncontract all the words or contract all the words. Okay, so in that example, that was the only word that had a contraction in it. There would be more down further. I didn't give the entire page. But if you felt that the assignment should all be uncontracted, then do it all uncontracted. Yes, you have that flexibility to do that. Yeah. And if you're in a classroom situation where you know exactly what the student is learning as far as vocabulary and that sort of thing, because you're working with the student, then you definitely customize it and uncontracted or contracted, depending on where the student is at with their learning. Okay. Right. Yeah. If you're doing it as a transcriber, you could choose to do it contracted or uncontracted. In that case, I would put a transcriber's note on the transcriber's note page saying, these words on this activity are all presented uncontracted. Okay. Give the teacher as much instruction or help in why you've brailled it the way you have. If it's a book that's being done by an agency to go out to a student, don't be afraid to give the teacher the help they need. That's what the transcriber's note page is. I mean, we don't want to give them a volume of 16 pages of instructions, but certainly if you feel it would be something that you needed to point out to the teacher that you've altered, be sure to put that in for them because it's for their benefit. Okay.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Bonnie. All right. Any other questions before we get back into the Bonnie's program? Okay. Well, if any others pop up in the chat, we'll get them in the next round of questions.
Okay.
Okay. Back to you, Bonnie.
I might have to move along a little bit quicker. I'm maybe a little too long-winded here. It's hard to cut it back because there's so much involved in each place, but we'll see how it goes. All right. So guideline 6 in your ELMP guidelines talks about line spacing relevant to headings, poetry, block text, and tactile graphics. We've looked at a few of these, but hopefully what's coming up then will add to that. So use 2 blank lines in double-spaced work between blocked paragraphs, stanzas of poetry and plays, before and after centered headings. You've seen that in action already. Before and after a list, before a cell 5 heading, before and after box lines, before and after tactile graphic, and before exercise directions. Okay. So we're going to see, we've seen a couple of those things already with the directions and the headings, but we're going to see each one of those things in action. And this is where I want to just state it again. The rule of thumb is if it's single spaced, if you need a blank line in single spaced material, you will likely need 2 blank lines in double spaced material. And as much as you'll see some frustrating things coming up as we go through this. And these will be the things that I hope you'll go like, oh, I'm so glad because I didn't know how to do that. I come across this constantly with early literacy because double spacing before and after headings causes a problem many times with then the work doesn't stay on one page, and it's frustrating. So we'll see some of that in action as we move along. Okay, let's just take a look at an example here. This is a similar book to what we've seen already. This is grade 1. So I used the reading comprehension again for your benefit as a running head. You've got 2 blank lines. We've seen this before. Centered heading poetry. And now we've got this thing here that says reading poetry. I treated that like a cell 5 heading because it had no period. It wasn't an instruction. It wasn't a comment. It was just there. And so I'm assuming that the author was just introducing poetry and reading it. So I treated that like a cell 5 heading. Then your instructions here in 5 and 5. Okay. In single spaced work, there doesn't need to be a blank line here, so you only need 1 in the double spaced work. Okay, normally there wouldn't be a blank line there. That's why there aren't 2 blank lines. After the directions, because it's poetry and poetry needs a blank line before and after it, we have to insert 2 blank lines. Okay, so this is the beginning of our poem, and I treated this like a stanza, this like a stanza, and this like a stanza. Because of the wider spacing in here, I treated each one of those as a stanza, and therefore we put 2 blank lines in between the stanza there. Okay, I didn't reflect the blue box. I didn't feel that was necessary because it's already been identified as a poem, and the blank lines actually do that for you. Here's the final stanza of the poem. It didn't fit all on the same page. Then we have 2 blank lines before our instructions. Underline the right answer. I didn't underline the underline because it wasn't necessary for understanding the instructions. Okay. Then we double spaced again, putting the answers in cell 3 with 2 blank lines or 2 blank lines, cells, sorry, between the words for ease of putting a mark, a underline or something. Sometimes they don't use it depends on the student and what they use. There may be various ways that the student indicates the answer. It might be a pencil underline, it might be a circle, it might be a sticker or something that they use as opposed to writing with a pencil too, just depending on the student, how they would handle that. But then that shows your questions and your answers. Questions start in cell 1 and the answer is indented in cell 3. Okay, here's another one that has a little sentence story here in the middle. So we've got the running head again, 2 blank cells, centered heading, 2 blank cells. You see the pattern developing here? And then making a connection to a story, I treat it again as a cell 5 heading. It's similar to the previous page. The instructions are here. And then, of course, we have a little story with a centered heading. So we have to now put 2 blank lines here and 2 blank lines following the heading. And then the story continues after that. The last word of the story ended up on this page simply by reason of that's the spacing, how it turned out. But then we leave 2 blank lines after the story before we have the questions. And here you can see it says, what has scared you? That's the question the student has to answer. Whether they write a few words or 1 word, or whether they're required to write a complete sentence, we don't know as a transcriber. I had the availability of the full page. I took advantage of it. I left multiple lines for the student to fill in their answer. Okay. All right, let's look at a little bit of math here. And again, we're still talking about spacing primarily, but this was an interesting one. I took this from a grade 2 glossary book, or from a book that had a glossary in it. Now, there's 2 ways to do glossary, and you have to look at your Braille formats, Principles of Print to Braille, to make sure you have the correct one. This one is done in the second style in that it has displayed material. It has tactile. Okay, so in that case, they if you look at your formats, 21.6.5, I believe it is, it will tell you how to do something of this nature. A regular glossary, your list word, entry word would be at the margin, would be in cell 1, and then the other lines would follow. This, because it has the tactile drawings and other expressions, the list word is treated as a cell 5 heading. Okay, so we're grade 2, we're single spaced, we've got a centered heading, one blank line. This is a cell 5 heading, and then your diagram. And this is a tactile drawing. It appears in cell 1. But now you've got this here, this little speech bubble or thought bubble, and we didn't reflect the bubble part, but we put this in as a displayed item. Okay, so that puts it in 3 and 5. Okay, and we listed that and followed it with this spatial equation in cell 3 as well. It's part of the displayed material. Here I've got an example of 2 ways of doing that math expression. They're both acceptable. Your agency that you're brailing for, or your school, your teacher will decide which they prefer to use. Just be consistent. If you're brailing it as a workbook, make sure that you do all your spatial math the same way. The difference is the separation line. In this one, the separation line just goes underneath. Oh, sorry. Let me quit clicking here and go back. Underneath this with the operation sign outside of it. This one, the line goes under all of it. Both are acceptable according to Braille, the technical formats. Just make sure that you don't be switching back and forth in a document. Pick that pattern. Different agencies will even maybe have that standard and they want it done a certain way, and then you just follow that format. Okay, so that just shows the 2 options, but there's actually only one in the print. Okay, so that's all in 3 and 5 because it's displayed. It's done secondly, so you see this comes first, the diagram second, the displayed third, and then we'll do this sentence here, and it will be in 3 and 1 because this was in cell 5. Then your format for sentences like this are 3 and 1. You've got your displayed item at the very last. Okay. All right. And I have one more that's at a grade 3 level. This is quite a busy little page here for a transcriber to evaluate. This was from a book, Math Makes Sense 3 Practice. So it was a workbook. And that's my running head that I used. Then I have my centered heading, Unit 3, Lesson 10, using mental math to subtract. Okay, student book lesson, that's something that appeared on every single page, and we didn't repeat it on every single Braille page. We dealt with it in the preliminary pages for explanation. So then we have a centered heading, quick review, and paragraphs. Now, if you look at this, they are all new paragraphs the way that they are done because they have not been continued on in longer sentences. So we assess those as being all new paragraphs. So then you've got everything starting in cell 3. This is one happens to wrap and it goes back to cell 1. But that's why that's all in cell 3. Okay. Some agencies may choose to block those. That's acceptable format according to formats. Then they would all start at the margin. So there's the 2 formats that are acceptable: blocked paragraphs or indented paragraphs. And you would choose which format you're going to use and be consistent throughout the entire book when you Braille that. Then we have a bulleted item, and this is a bulleted item here, and this is a second bulleted item here. So we're treating it this first and this second. This is an arrow, but in this particular book, that all bullets were represented by that arrow. So I just simply used the regular bullet. If you feel you need to reflect that arrow, go for it. But it constitutes more cells, and that's why I chose to use a simpler one, because it had fewer cells. And I could do that just because it was the only one used in the book. If there's two different styles, then you need to follow print. So then we had just simply use a friendly number. That think that's in a little cloud there, I just eliminated the cloud. It wasn't necessary. I put it as the next point and then followed it with the 3 math sentences after that. Then I did the second bullet and followed the same pattern there. Okay. Then going on further, Hannah had 37 acorns left, which is a response to that. Ended up at the top of the next page. That's perfectly fine. Then we have a centered heading says, try these, use mental math. Now, this is a little bit of a query. There's often things like this show up. Is that a direction or is it a comment for information? And sometimes it's tough to know which it is. So what you need to do is you need to look at the entire book and say, are there lots of those situations? Are they similar? How will we treat them? Will we treat them like cell 5 directions, or will we treat them like cell 3 comments? And once you make that decision, you just do it consistently the same throughout the book. You could have argument as to which way it was a lot of the time. I chose to use it as a comment just to show you how that would be done in cell 3 then as an indented paragraph. And I did that primarily because number 1 says subtract. So your instructions are actually happening there as well. Now, that doesn't make it wrong if you use a cell 5 set of instructions for this as well. And then, of course, we have underneath subtract, we've got number 1 is in cell 1. The ABCs are in cell 3, and they're linear equations. We didn't need to put the blank after the equation, the equal sign. It's one of those formats that it states it's not necessary in that kind of a situation. The student knows that after the equal sign, there's going to be an answer required. Okay. The next, number 2, now is spatial. So we have spatial equations, and we are allowed to do those horizontally for the sake of saving space. I used the short separation line there, and I put 2 blank cells, or sorry, 2 blank lines below. If the student is going to put an answer on this page, that gives them just a little bit more room to handle the paper and get an answer in there. Normally, if it's in a textbook that's bound and not going to be used as consumable, there would only be 1 blank line there. Okay. All right, then let's move along to our next guideline, guideline 9, workbooks and spellers. And we've seen a little bit of this in action already, but there will be a few more things that we can point out. Horizontal word lists, as you've seen already in a couple places, use 2 blank cells between the words. Okay. And here's a small example. We just have these 2 sets of words, cat, hat, bat, and we've got the 2 cells in between. We've seen that in one of our examples previously as well, so that's pretty straightforward. And now we have mathematical and non-alphabetic signs in some of our literary work. Here, I don't know if you can see it, but that E is crossed out in print. And so what we do then is we braille the word, then we show with a hyphen that the word is crossed out. We follow it with the change that they're teaching, which is adding ing, and we do it with uncontracted braille, and then we follow it with the contracted form. So then we need a transcriber's note because we've done a lot of changing from what the original print was in order to make it useful for the student. So here's a sample of what it would be, and this did appear, if you remember, on the transcriber's note page at the beginning. Words with crossed out letters are uncontracted, so we've uncontracted this word. Didn't have one, but it would, if it was a contraction, we would uncontract it. Then we've repeated with a hyphen substituted for each crossed out letter. So there's our crossed out letter, and we've substituted the hyphen for that. And then The contracted word is brailled following the uncontracted word. If we hadn't done that, we would have had to put that in transcriber note indicators. And we didn't want to clutter the word and change the shape by doing that. So we stated it in the transcriber's note, and then that explains why we've added that word. And we do that for the benefit of the student because we don't know at what level they're at doing uncontracted or contracted braille, what they've learned yet, but we show them both formats. Here's one with a word equation, so it's got mathematical symbols in it. Okay, that's relatively simple. We just used hope. The plus sign, we've spaced it. This is grade 1 work. The false is braille out, of course, and then the equal sign, and then the hopeful, uncontracted, and contracted. And we've just simply said uncontracted braille is used for a word in a word equation. Okay, so in the whole word equation, we would use uncontracted braille, and we would tell the teacher that that's what we've done. And then the contracted form is brailled following the equation. So that transcriber's note then would go on the transcriber's note page. That's information for the teacher, not the student. And so therefore that transcriber's note does not appear in the student's work, but it would appear on the transcriber's note page. If the teacher has any questions about what's happening, we hope that they would turn to that transcriber's note page to see what the transcriber has explained. Okay. All right, activities to omit. This is a tough one. This is one that always makes us scratch our head and get slivers. Don't omit an activity unless it's really absolutely necessary. Our goal is to transcribe and present to the braille reading student as much as we can of what we see in print. So if we can avoid omitting it, that's your first rule of thumb. Now, activities that may have to be omitted, and here's a few of them. This still comes under the discretion of the transcribing agency and the transcriber. They have to analyze very carefully what to do. But pictures that are to be identified by name that would reveal answers to the activity questions themselves, we can't successfully do those. Handwriting activities, and we already addressed that. We'll see another one coming up, which actually would be omitted. Lines or boxes depicting the shape of the word, and there's 2 options there, which we'll see in a minute. And then puzzles that can't be successfully reproduced. Okay, omitted activities are listed on the transcribers or on a TN page of the teacher's reference materials. Okay, so now what I've done here is I've given us a handful of activities. I'm going to say, would you omit this or wouldn't you omit this, and see if I can explain why you might or might not. And if you want to make some notes on questions you have about this, be sure to do that, because there's no right answer. There's good and bad, and there's better and worse, but there's no right or wrong answer here. So here's what it looks like in a math book, on a grade 1 math book. This is the introduction of a new unit, and this is this. So every unit had a picture similar to this on it. And what it said at the bottom was, the focus was the children were to talk about the patterns in the picture. So of course it's on patterning. So they're to talk about the patterns. And the home connection says, ask your child to look at the picture and describe the patterns. Well, we can't actually reproduce that for several reasons. One, if you tried to do it as a tactile drawing, it would be enormous. You'd have to separate this one out and this one out, and this one out. You would have about 10 tactile pages for that one. Okay. If you tried to describe it, you would run into problems because we're not supposed to use a lot of long-winded or wordy transcriber's notes in grade 1 because they may not be able to read all the words anyway. So we pretty much had to eliminate that one and leave it up to the teacher to figure out a different way that they can do that. For example, they can use items and manipulatives and make patterns that the Braille student could work with. Okay, so we pretty much had to leave that up to the teacher to use it in a different way. All right, now here's a little dot-to-dot activity. Dot-to-dot activities are easy to do and difficult to do at the same time, depending on their nature. What this activity is teaching is the letters of the alphabet. So they've got all the letters A to Z. This would be a flower that this bee would be buzzing through to get to the hive. This one I chose to recommend it be omitted because it's very close and it's a lot of stuff all happening close together, and it would be difficult to get all those letters and dots put onto a page and be able to follow them sensibly through. Now, as a transcriber or a teacher, if you felt you could take that activity and simplify it and make it meaningful, yes, do that. Okay, don't just eliminate it, but then say to the teacher, put in a transcriber's note saying the activity on page 10 has been altered. And this is what you've done. So if you can figure out a way to use all the letters of the alphabet, make it a bigger diagram that they could follow from dot to dot, go for it. If not, then you have to omit it. Okay, so don't just look at it and give up, but readjusting that into a slightly altered activity is time consuming. So you have to, of course, look at that as well. Here's one that we would eliminate and will not eliminate. There's two options on an activity sheet like this. For example, it says, let's celebrate numbers. They're talking about the number 2. How many balloons do you see? Okay, you could take the top of that assignment. You could do a tactile drawing of 2 balloons. You could have the student count those 2 balloons and write the letter or the number 2. Perfectly easy activity to adapt for the VI student. This, not so much. We don't need them to trace the number 2 because that's of no value to them. So this tracing activity would likely be omitted. But you could retain this that says print the number, because then they can learn how to print the number in Braille and print their number 2. So this one would be one that could be partially done. Okay, and you might just say to the teacher, the tracing activity has been omitted, and then include the rest. Okay, I'm hoping this is all making sense. If it's not, you be sure to shout at me. Here's one that you probably would not do as it stands, because again, it's a tracing activity, not useful to the Braille reader. The teacher might insert a different activity in there. As a transcriber, we can't insert an alternative activity because we're not allowed to edit per se or teach. So we have to try and just work with what we see on the page. So I would say this could be omitted, but this could be included with a tactile drawing. These are balloons that have different color names in them, and they're to color them the different colors. Now, I haven't been in the classroom for many, many years, and I don't know what all is out there available, but apparently I've been told that there are crayons with Braille labels on the colors that students can have access to. If I don't know where you would access those, but apparently they are. If you have access to something like that, or if you have access to the smelly crayons that could be done, you could alter this activity by drawing these in a tactile fashion and Braille the word. Keep losing my cursor here. Braille the word, and then they could color it. If you have the means to adapt it in that way, then you could include it. If you have the means to adapt it in another fashion, then you could do a tactile drawing of the balloons. Otherwise, the activity would have to be omitted. Okay, so with the tools and things that are available out there, it's possible that this could be done in an altered fashion. This not so much. Okay, now this one is an example of one that would omit. In this situation now, there are allowances for these letter boxes, which I'll just mention in a minute. The reason I would omit this one is because it's grade 1. We're to keep our transcribers' notes to a minimum, and in order to give them a clue for this answer, we have to put in a transcriber's note that describes what's happening in that picture. Then you have to decide, is that transcriber's note going to be too complicated and too wordy for the grade 1 student at this stage of their learning? And if it is, then you would omit it. Okay. Now in the guidelines, in guideline 8, it does show you an example of where these boxes are handled in a different fashion. And the difference is the boxes in the activity shown there are in a sentence. So it's easy for us to replace the boxes with hyphens and indicate that the student has to fill in a word. And the guideline 8 is very clear on explaining that for you, so it's easy to do. But the difference is these boxes showed up in a sentence. So we could replace them with a blank that had meaning for the student. Okay, this one is a little bit different in that it would require transcriber's notes. All right, so any comments? I'll just stop there, Adam, for a minute and ask if there's any comments on those to be omitted things.
Bonnie, actually, in addition to that, we have a couple of questions that have just popped in just before the omissions section.
Okay.
So I wonder if, well, I'll let people comment on the omissions section first because we're kind of right there. And then if there are no questions about that, I might take us back to some of those other ones.
Okay. No?
Okay. If we might have some people furiously typing.
There you go. Well, let's just hope we don't have anybody furious at my comments.
No, I'm sure not. I'm sure not. Well, while we're waiting, let me just go back. Seema had a question on slide 27. Would you use numeric passage indicator for that series of problems?
Numeric passage indicator
on slide 27.
I'm not sure. Is she referring to the? Yeah, I can't get back to 27 here easily. Is that the spatial? Is she referring to the spatial?
I think so.
At grade 3 level, you could use the numeric indicator. It certainly is acceptable to do that. So that would be an agency choice, whether they were with spatial arrangements, if they were to use the numeric indicator or put the individual signs in. Both ways are acceptable, so it would be just a choice by the transcriber or the agency.
Got it. Okay, Seema says thanks.
Yeah.
In the chat. And then Michelle made a comment at the point of the Braille crayon piece,
right.
And she mentioned how you could put labels on them, or you could use tactile markings or stickers to indicate where the student would need to color. So
yeah. So there are ways of adapting that type of activity to make it fun for the student instead of just omitting it. That's a good comment. Yes, there's different ways they can allow the student to use colors or things like that.
Right.
Yeah, certainly, or even markers. I know they have smelly markers that a certain scent is a certain color. Things like that. Yeah. Try and adapt the activity so the student can do it before you choose to omit it. Right. Always try to do that. Yeah.
And Michelle's just noted that it likely depends on the student and the student's profile. Yeah.
Yeah. And adapting it that way is easier in the classroom because the teacher knows the student and knows what they have for supplies. When you're doing it as a transcriber for an agency, you would make it adaptable or adapt it so that it could be done rather than omit it and hope that the teacher would be able to have the tools to do it. Okay, so we would assume if we're a transcriber and we're doing it and we're adapting it, we're going to assume that hopefully the classroom will have the things they need to do it in the adapted format. Yeah, rather than omit it. Like I say, omit is the last option.
Right. Yeah. Okay, before we get back to the program, any questions or comments related to the omission section? And okay, I'm just looking. I don't see any raised hands. And okay, so I should also mention that we've got a really jam-packed program here, and which is wonderful.
Does anybody need a coffee break?
Well, I was going to say, if people do need to take a break, by all means, feel free to step away because we are recording this, right? Unless you need a break, Bonnie.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right.
I'm a
Perfect.
workhorse.
Perfect. All right. Well, then Bonnie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, we'll be dealing with guidelines for puzzles and that, and it will take us a little while, but then after that, I think it'll go a little more quickly because the last ones are a little less complicated. Nothing's uncomplicated in Braille, but it's less complicated. All right, so guideline 9 talks about puzzles. And again, puzzles are similar to other activities. Try not to omit them if they can be done. And then we'll look at the guidelines on how to do some. So one of them is the configuration boxes that are presented with spaced hyphens. Okay, and that one we've already touched on. It's in guideline 8 as to how to do them. Okay, the shape of the configuration boxes are ignored, but there are alternative ways of doing it, okay? And that is clearly outlined in guideline 8. Word search puzzles are single spaced with a blank cell between the letters, and we'll see that in a minute. And we did use the dot locator for grade 1 passage to clear the clutter out of the grid itself, okay? Dot to dots can be created using tactile drawings, and we'll see that. If you're creating a dot to dot using Braille dots, then the dots 2, 3, 5, 6, the lower G, would be the symbol you would use for your dot, okay? And with numbers, you would retain your numeric indicator, place the numbers so that they best fit without interfering with the movement from dot to dot, and we'll see an example of that. Capital letters do not need a grade 1 indicator, but lowercase letters do if you're doing it as a tactile drawing. Well, actually, if you're doing it in any format, those rules apply too. Okay, so let's take a look at a few puzzles here. This first one is a nice dot to dot, but they've used the words 1 to 10 instead of a number or letter. But let's take a look at the top. I have these dots up here. That's on my, of course, tactile graphics. I just did that so you can kind of get a relationship of lines and spaces for what's happening on the page. That's not something that would appear on your document at all. So we have line 1, then we have reading practice. Reading number words is a centered heading. Now, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 10 in numbers and in words across the top here are in all kinds of fun colors. And of course, we just don't need to reflect those colors at all. There's no need for that. So we just simply Braille the number 1 followed by the word 1. And then we treated it like a horizontal list. We put the 2 blank cells between it. Sorry, you can't see this because it's a tactile drawing. But there are 2 blank cells between each number grouping. So the number and the word for that number is a group, and there's 2 blank cells between each one, and we've done them horizontally there. Okay, then we have a cell 5 instruction, connect the dots from 1 to 10. And we have this little car. So the car shows the wheels and a bit of outline of the doors and windows. And then the outside edge of the car is going to be joined dot to dot to make it finish it off. They've got the word start at the bottom. If you notice though, we brailled all these words outside the dots so that the student could hopefully track the dots as they went around the car and still find where the numbers are. And it would be a fairly simple puzzle to do tactily, okay? That one turned out fairly simple. This one, now I'm showing you an activity here that's double spaced. It's grade 1, gets a little more complicated with tactile because of space on a page. But at the very top, I also showed, this is in one of the guidelines. Let me think for a minute. Do I remember which one it is? I think it's guideline 10 coming up, where you may have the student put their name at the top of the page. That's an agency decision or a teacher decision, whether or not to use that. You can use it or you can leave it off. Both are acceptable. You just have to make that formatting choice when you start. I've used the word activity chapter 8 at the top here. Okay. This little note here is for the teacher, so we didn't include that in the student's copy. Okay. We have a little poem. Oh, sorry, it's not a poem. Instructions. So the first line says, some stars form pictures in the sky. That's not an instruction. That's a sentence of information. So that's in cell 1 or cell 3, depending on if you're indented or blocked format. These 3 lines are instructions, and because they didn't continue again, we treated them like 3 separate paragraphs. So we had the first set of instructions, the first line in cell 5, subsequent paragraphs in instructions are in 7 and 5. So that's why these 2 are indented a little bit further. Nothing wrapped, so you don't see the consistency of the cell 5 there, because these 2 sentences didn't wrap. But that's all constitutes the instructions. Then we had this as a centered heading because it's in the center in print and it's underlined in print. So we had to assume that was a centered heading, and we treated it as such. So we have 2 blank lines before that because we're in double-spaced work. Now, however, in order to get this little dipper in here, which is what that diagram is, we didn't have enough space. So here's where there's an example of how you can eliminate a blank line around a title in a tactile diagram situation because you need the space for the diagram itself. Okay, but you do need 1 blank line for sure. Okay, you can't close it in any further. And then, of course, it came right down to the bottom of the page. Also look, though, that here's our start. Our start is at the pole. It's labeled pole. And we have number 1. And we've labeled put our numbers again outside so that they can get from dot to dot without interfering with the numbers, but they can find them. Okay, so your tracing has to be easily found that way. All right, this one is a grade 2. It's simple. It could be it could have been grade 1 as well as far as the style of it is. It's a little tent. It has some lines provided and then other lines you have to join with the dots. This is a set of instructions, just simply says follow the dots from 1 to 10, color the picture. And we treated that again like 2 paragraphs because that's the way they formatted it. So it's in cell 5 and then the second line in cell 7. 1 blank line only because we needed the space for our diagram. Well, actually, it's grade 2, so it would be single spaced anyway. So you only need 1 blank line there. I'm getting myself in a confusion here. Okay, and again, if you follow from dots 1, 2, 3, and so on, you'll see that 1 to 2 to 3 has actually been done for you, but then our numbers again are outside of the dots successfully enough that the student should be able to follow the dots. So those dot to dots are fairly easy to do. Those are done with tactile drawings. Again, now if you were to do it with Braille dots, you wouldn't be able to do one that already has these lines because they would be difficult to draw with Braille lines, but you can create dot to dots that can be done just with using this Braille cell. Here's a word search puzzle. And so I've treated this in this case just like a centered heading. And because it's grade 1, it's double spaced. So we've got 2 blank lines between the centered heading and find the words, colon. Now you see that find the words is down below before the word list. In word search puzzles, the word list always goes first. So when we transcribe it, we convert that and we put it first and then follow it with the grid. I've used the use indicator and I've pulled all the grade 1 indicators out and all of the capital signs out so that I can make this a little more clear and simplify it for the student, because they're looking for the same shape of the word, the same letters as what's in the grid. I didn't want these indicators to interfere with that. Okay, I uncontracted it because they have to find it in the grid. So the letters, they're looking for letters, and so that it is all uncontracted. Now there's 2 formats here I'm showing you. This one is done in a vertical list. So I have blocked my lists. I got a jittery finger here on my mouse. I've blocked the words in vertically, okay, which follows what you see in print. That worked well because it happened to fit across the page nice and neatly. And so in this case, using the vertical list was fine. If you have a longer word somewhere or two in here, and then you're going to run into wrap problems and interfere with the style of the list, you can use a horizontal list, and that's what this is. This is a horizontal list down below here, and it's just got 2 cells in between each word. And then if they happen to wrap, you could just carry on. Again, this one, I was able to fit each line across on a separate line, and so I did that, but you could just make it a continuous set of words with 2 cells between if you needed to, just depending on what's happening there. So there are 2 options for doing the word list. And then here's your grid. The grid isn't single spaced, but there is a cell between each letter so that they can look for the word. And then we closed our indicators. Okay. This one is a little more complicated. It resembles a crossword puzzle. The directions for doing an actual crossword puzzle grid and words is very clearly laid out in the Braille formats. So always refer to that. If you're doing a crossword, it's very well done there for you. We have a centered heading. I retained the name just to show you the example. This is uncontracted, or I mean double spaced because it's grade 1. So there's your name if it's at the top again, 2 blank lines, centered heading, 2 blank lines, your directions. And then I've got a transcriber's note in here that says, Braille the right word below each sentence, because in the instructions, it says draw a line from each sentence to the right word. Well, that would be difficult to do for 2 reasons. The sentences and the list do not fit side by side in Braille. So it can't be done in that format. And so therefore I did have to use a transcriber's note here and give the student a bit of instructions. Had I not put that in, it would have been left up to the teacher to change the instructions, which wouldn't have been wrong. It's never wrong to just Braille what you see, but I chose in this case to tell the student how they could do this because my list and my thing didn't fit side by side. Okay, now when I made my word list, I put it first. As always, the word list always comes first, and I brailled it contracted and uncontracted. So now there's going to be 2 things we're looking at here. This is correct to do it this way, and we need to do it that way because here they would put it contracted in the sentence. If they had learned it contracted, they know their contractions, and we don't know whether they do or not, so we present it that way. But for the grid, for the puzzle, they needed uncontracted in order to be able to count boxes, okay, or spaces. So we've presented it in both. Now, here's the catch. So now I've got my sentences, okay? I've included the dash here because technically speaking, grammatically, this is inside the sentence because they're replacing it with a capitalized word, which would be the beginning of the sentence because there's a period at the end. So I have to consider that that dash is inside my sentence. Same at the end, because the period is outside the dash is part of the sentence, so I have to retain it. Okay. So they've got that. I've left, because I had room on the page, I left 2 blank lines for them to place the answer. Just gives the student a little more ease and flexibility for finding that blank spot to put the sentence or the word in. If you're putting that paper in and out of a Braille writer, you know how easy and how difficult it is to line things up. So give the student the benefit of the extra space whenever you can. Okay. And then we have the grid at the back. Okay. And it says put each word into the puzzle. And of course, they would use these words. Now, on this page, because it had to be on a new page, if you were to count your lines, Bonnie, if you were to count your lines, you would notice that you actually have enough lines with double spacing available to repeat that on this page and keep your list words and your grid together. So what you could do back here, instead of doing it like this, you could just list them in this format for the sake of this assignment, not necessarily using the uncontracted unless you felt they needed both to answer this. You could also then repeat that list and put it before the grid on this page. So they didn't have to flip pages back and forth when they're doing the activity. Okay, so to list that again would be acceptable. Okay, all right, now we're going to look at a few things. We're going to see a few more examples of blank lines, blank spaces, and things in the expendable material. A lot of this we've already covered. It seems to be a repeat, but it's still good to see some of the examples. With expendable or consumable material, obviously it's done single-sided. If you're going to braille or answer on a page, you can't have something on the back side. Begin each new activity on a new braille page. The name and the date may be omitted or retained, and that's a teacher or agency decision, and that's stated right in the guideline 10 in early literacy, that you have that option and flexibility. Double space for underlining and circling. So even if you're in single spaced work and they are asked to underline or circle, you would double space it to give them space. Leave plenty of space if the student is answering on the activity page with either words or sentences. And the first rule of thumb is to double space. Second is leave 2 blank lines if they're putting in a word or a sentence answer. If possible, if it's a sentence answer, give them 3 or 4 blank lines if you can. It's just for the student's benefit. If you know they're going to be using that piece of paper to answer, give them the room that they need to make it easier for them. Omit print lines, dashes, etc., indicating a required answer before and after the question. Okay, and we've already seen the one that was inside. Okay, we kept that because it was inside the question, and we used that underscore to represent that. So we'll see some now. We've got an activity here that has just about everything on it. This one that we did before, and I'm just bringing this one back to your attention to show you the vertical list again, and the circling and how the double spacing applies to the circling. So you've actually seen this before. This one happens to start with a little 4-line poem. And so there's a blank line before and after because it's grade 2, it's single spaced. So we just have 1 blank line before and after poetry. This is the boxed material in yellow. Again, now at the grade 2 level, you could retain the box if you felt it was necessary. Just be consistent for everything that is that style. Centered heading with the instructions, and there's your vertical list. That could be done in a horizontal list fashion as well, and it would be acceptable. On this page, then, you see that we have double spaced this so that they can circle or underline. It says circle the words in the sentences in which Y is the long E sound. And so then that gives them room to circle what they need to circle. Okay. This one, again, has similar identifications, grade 2 and 3. We still didn't bother retaining the blue coloring because we didn't feel it was necessary. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. This is an example that I've showed you where we did retain the blue just for the sake of seeing that it can be done. Okay, so we've retained it on the yes, the no, and the closed questions in the instructions. Again, you could choose to retain it or not retain it. Just be consistent throughout any workbook that is done in a similar way. Again, the answers are put underneath, so you have the question in cell 5 and the answers in cell 3. Now, under the first one, we have a little transcriber's note. Because in print, the answer yes is circled. And so we had to indicate that to the student. And we just put a little transcriber's note in that said yes is circled. That's all you need to say. And they know that. And we put it immediately after the answer to that first question, and they'll know that it belongs with that. Then everything else is double spaced to allow for the circling of the answers. Okay. All right, now here's a fun one. It's got everything in the code book in one page. So this is a grade 2 level, so it's single spaced. We have lesson 14, subjects and predicates, as the centered heading at the top. And I did retain the box here. So in this activity workbook, that was important to retain this box. And so this just shows you how that looks if I retain the box. The square bullet was the only shape of bullet used in this book. And so I just used the simple bullet. Okay. Now I did retain all the type form indicators here because I thought it was important to what was happening in this box. They've bolded the word subject, predicate there in the sentences, and they've bolded them again down below where they've given the examples of the subject and predicate. So I felt it was necessary to retain that bold, and we did that there. Okay. The underlining for the sentence diagramming is a single underline under the subject, a double underline under the predicate, and we just simply did that. We used a single underline indicator for the subject, which is a UEB symbol, and we used the transcriber defined indicator for the double underline. And if you look in the formats code book, you will see that that is actually listed that way there for you. And the example is there. So in the formats book, that does appear. It's in formats, I think it's rule 18. It talks about sentence diagramming, and it shows that exact thing used to indicate the double underline. And that would, of course, go on your special symbols page and be identified there. Okay. So now we have an A, B, C, and D on this page assignment. A, you have to add a subject to each of the predicates. Again, this is a sentence. It has blank, play, tennis, period. So we had to retain that indicator for the blank because it is inside a sentence, even though it looks like in print, it doesn't look like it is, but it is. Okay. All right, everybody's got that. This one, B, again, we had to retain the underscore or put the underscore in for the blank because the blank is inside the period. And so it's part of the sentence as well. Okay. Now, when we get down to C, it says write subject or predicate to tell which part of the sentence is underlined. So now in this case, we had to use the underline indicator because the directions tell us that something is underlined in the actual activity. So we have to retain it there. We have no choice, but we don't retain these dashes that they have here because they're outside the sentence and the student is not going to write on that line. But we did leave 2 blank lines after each sentence to allow the student to write the subject or predicate underneath there. I would even be tempted in my work to put 3 blank lines in there to give the student that extra space to type that word, because in some cases they're going to have to type that whole phrase as opposed to one word. So if your space allows, you could put 3 blank lines in there just to help the student. Okay. Now, section D says draw a line under each subject and 2 lines under each predicate. The teacher may have them do it with lines. They may have them do it with some other means. We don't know that. So we braille it exactly as it is. And then we double space it so that they can at least draw a line or mark it in some fashion. So that assignment is double spaced. So that was an excellent one to see dashes inside sentences, outside sentences, underlining the use, having to retain all the type form that was in the print assignment because it was needed for interpretation for the usefulness of the assignment. So that was a fairly busy one there. Okay. Oh. Okay. And so now how's our time, Adam? We got not much time left. I better get you through these and then you can ask some questions.
Great. Thanks, Bonnie.
Okay, so Guideline 11 talks about stories and trade books, and we'll go through this fairly quickly. I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with these types of books. They're the small books that can be either leisure reading or curriculum books. They're smaller sized with only one line or sentence on a page, and they're often done as twin vision books, print braille. So your twin vision are created with having braille added by using clear adhesive labels, by inserting clear plastic pages, in which case the braille faces the print, and they can be read by both print and braille readers. And often they include page numbers. Sometimes they don't. So we do include the page numbers when they are shown in print. And here's a little sample of one that I've done, and it has the label in it. Okay, so you can kind of see it there. It's been done double spaced because it's a pre-kindergarten. It's just an early reader. And so I've double spaced it, and I've actually uncontracted it and inserted the labels. Okay, and I think you're all familiar with the books that have the inserted pages in them, that the braille is on clear plastic. Is there anyone that wouldn't be familiar with that? I think most are. You can mention that anyway. If you're not, you can ask. The other thing is mini workbooks or mini books inside a bigger book. Okay. There's a lot of books that have these little mini books in them. They may have their own page numbering, and the print reader removes these pages and folds them into a mini book. So I've got two samples just to wrap this up. This was done in my Math Makes Sense grade 1 book, and I put these sideways to show you the print page. This is the way they actually appeared in the textbook, or the workbook was sideways like this. Okay, that's why I put them that way. I'm just going to quickly show you a few of the pages, not all of them, because we've gone over a lot of the formatting already. So we have a running head, our double space centered, double space centered. This has two headings, one here and one at the bottom. You could have combined those into one heading unit if you wanted to. That option is perfectly okay. And then we have this little poem. It's 4 lines and it's double spaced. Pretty straightforward. I'm showing you now this page 2 here. And I'm showing you that it just simply has the centered heading with the blank lines before and after, double spaced. This entire textbook was indented format, so that there's the text that's indented. And this whole thing, even though it's got shorter lines in it, I treated like one paragraph, because these boxes is what kind of caused the format they used. And so I just simply treated that like one paragraph. Toy Stories, new centered heading with double blank lines. And again, I just treated those as paragraphs. So these 3, because it's indented format, will just be brailled as regular paragraphs. This is the first one, and the second and third one fit on the next page. Okay, and just brailled as paragraphs. Okay, this just shows the other page that was there. This is pages 3 and 6, I believe it is. I didn't do any braille. That is straightforward. This one I wanted to show you that we used a tactile drawing for these shapes. And so this is on a tactile page, and there's one blank line left between the tactile and the, there could have been 2 blank lines, but the minimum is 1 blank line between text and the drawing. This page had more room, but you don't want to space it too far away because the student has to search for it. And so you want it to be reasonably spaced. Okay, this is just the second half of the page that had the tactile drawing on it, and it just shows the use of bulleted items. So they're in 1 and 3, and then these 3 questions that were in the little colored bubbles, we just brailled them as a list. So we've got 2 blank lines before it because I treated it like a list, and a list has to have a blank line before and after regular format. Okay, now the last example I've got here is an interesting one, and it's this hundreds chart. Okay, now what I've got on this page is I've got my running head as usual. I've got my centered heading, and then I did this as a tactile drawing, and it won't fit because I need every single line to get that chart on a page. A centered heading cannot stand alone by itself. So what are we going to do? We're going to put in a transcriber's note, which we have to put in anyway, to tell the reader that the chart is on the next page. And that's what we've done. Simply said, the chart is on the next page. That legalizes the heading to sit here on this page because it's no longer alone. It's got the transcriber's note, and it gives me the flexibility to get that thing done as a tactile drawing with all the lines that I need. And as you can see, I did manage to maintain my running head, but everything else, it took the entire page. And down below, you'll see that it just has the bottom page number. If there was a Braille page number on that, it would be there. But that diagram took the entire page. So that was a tricky thing to do. And that's how I got around it. That is. Now, I'm going to show you another slide. So here's that same hundreds chart done in Braille without the tactile. So there's the tactile format you can use. If you did it this way, and it's double spaced because it's grade 1, it will fit with the heading on one page. And you can do it just that way if you prefer. And it does still allow for your double spacing before and after your heading. The only catch to this page is you do not have room for a Braille page number. So if it's in a bound book where you need the running Braille page number, you're in trouble, and this wouldn't work. In that case, you would have to resort back to single spacing the hundreds chart itself. Okay, so those are the 3 ways that the hundreds chart could be done and used in the book. All right, one last example, and then I'll be quieter. This was done, and it appeared in the workbook in this style. So this is your 8.5 or your 9x11 workbook page, and it was sideways on the page in that format, and it was meant to be taken out, cut, and folded. Okay. What I did with it, there's 2 ways of doing this. This one that you see here is done on 8.5 or 11 by 11.5. So you've got the 40 cells. You could also do it on 8.5 by 11. It would just adjust, you know, your line endings and your runovers and things like that. Okay, this was in a grade 2, so it's single spaced. But I did 3 pages on one page, 3 pages on this page, and then the last page had 2 pages on, and I lined them up like that, just with the page numbers that appeared on that, so that this could be taken out and bound. On the 11 by 11 that you see here, you'll notice that it only goes to line 19. If you wanted to get creative, the student could, as an activity, cut that off and make a smaller book. Not necessary, but they could. It's just an option, you know, just pick your longest line of the page and do that. Or if it's done on an 8.5 by 11, then they could just pull it out and they could creatively staple it or do something with it to make it into a little booklet. So you could put it on either shape, depending on the overall format of the document that you're doing. You could use the 2 different sizes of paper. And that's all I have there. That's the finish. So you have like 5 minutes. Sorry, I was so long-winded.
That's okay, Bonnie. Thank you so much. That was an incredible amount of information, and I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to connect with you today. And also, I'm grateful for the recording function in Zoom, because that was a lot of information, and I'm glad we'll be able to go back and look at it. Michelle, what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to go back in reverse order for the questions, because I feel like the questions that we got most recently are more directly tied to where we are in the presentation. So first question, what are those plasticized sheets called, and where do you get them?
Oh boy. Oh, I haven't used them for a long time. Warren, help me out on this. He's my supply person. He's going to look it up for me in just a minute. He's got it in his notes there.
Okay. So okay. We'll keep skipping ahead. Michelle had asked for those little books, is Typeform maintained in those little books?
Only if no, let me say no to begin with, because most of them are done for pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade.
Okay.
So it would not be. If it's a little bit higher level book, you could retain the type form.
Okay.
But in a lot of little books like this, for example, the type is bold naturally, but you don't need to reflect that. You would only need to reflect it depending on the context of the book and if it's needed, really needed, you know. Like, for example, if the word splash was in large type and bolded, we would probably double capitalize it at least to indicate that it's different than the regular type, you know. But we would still use type form sparingly, depending on the level of the reader.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Now, someone noticed that there might have been a dash from the old code on one of your
Oh, really?
pages. But the question, that's not the question. The question is, would there ever be an instance where we would need to use the dash from the old code?
No, that dash that they saw might have been was it in my PowerPoint?
Yes, it would have been in. It would have been in. I should have taken note where in the.
Okay, can that person tell us where it is? Because it shouldn't have been there.
Andrea, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Do you remember where it was?
No, that's okay. I thought I saw it a couple of times. One where it was, it may have been fill in the blank symbol, not a hyphen or a dash, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, also,
it should.
Sorry.
I will scrutinize my document and see, but there shouldn't have been one there. It must have been something else that, it wasn't the underscore.
What is the symbol? Sorry, I'm just drawing.
The underscore is a 4-6.
Okay.
3-6.
No, it was a .5, and then in the next braille cell 3-6.
That's a minus sign.
Sorry,
That's a minus sign. That is a minus sign. That's not a dash. A dash is a .6, 3-6.
Yes.
Not a .5, a .6.
Okay. Okay, I may have misunderstood that page, and okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I hope I didn't do that, but I will before I send the PowerPoint, I'll look at it again, but it shouldn't have been there.
No problem. And some of those symbols, like I'm still
well, and I went through it fairly quickly.
So.
Yeah, that's why it would be good for you to have the print copy afterwards. I'll send it to Adam and he can distribute it. Because whenever I've been to a workshop, I've always liked to go back and read it again to see what the Braille looks like, you know, sort of thing. So yeah, this was a tremendous amount of information in one lump.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Bonnie. And thanks, Andrea. Question from earlier, in the word search example you used, Bonnie, given that the list was alphabetical, could you do it following the words down rather than across?
Yes, you can always convert a horizontal list to a vertical list.
Okay.
In Braille, if you have the space, depending on the length of the list, it might get quite long. But if it's better for the student, or if it's preferable by the agency, a vertical list can always be substituted. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Going back to the tent, the dot-to-dot picture of the tent, with the first two number connections demonstrated for the students, so with the line segments that were given, would those lines be better tactily discerned, e.g. heavier, so the Braille reader isn't confused by which line of the diagram versus the lines, which lines are connecting lines? So would you make that line heavier?
You could. That would be at the discretion of your tactile artist, and they have the freedom to use different strengths of lines to indicate different things. Yes, definitely.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, that is I've gone through the back catalog of questions that I had. Oh, we've just had one come in from Carla. If there's a short paragraph with multiple fill in the blanks, where does a student typically write their responses?
Okay, a short paragraph with multiple, say that again?
With multiple blanks, like the students, like you would assume that the students using print would write in their response in like a blanks in a paragraph.
Okay, if it's in early literacy, there's two ways of doing it. They could space the paragraph with blank lines, like 2 blank lines between each line of the paragraph. Or they could just braille the paragraph and leave a half a page or a third of a page blank for them to put the answers below. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Like I say, there's different ways of doing things. None of them are necessarily wrong. As long as you're following the main guidelines, you have flexibility in that. It's just nice to, if it happens 2 or 3 times in the document, do it the same all 3 times, unless you have to change it for some reason. But if they're similar, like if there's several pages with that kind of paragraph fill in the blank situation, then pick a pattern and do it the same so that the student sees it the same each occasion. Yeah.
Bonnie, before we, just as we're wrapping up, oh, hang on, one more.
One more?
That
doesn't help them, does it?
Well, so can you quickly describe the most efficient / easiest way to transcribe a closed passage?
Closed passage.
Like, no, like CLOZE.
CL.
Linda, do you want to jump on if you don't mind?
Yeah,
just make sure we get make everything for the question.
Yeah, so closed passage is something that we use with reading comprehension, where there's options within where we leave blanks so that the child can fill them in.
So are they giving answer options, answer choices, or they just have to fill it in from understanding?
They're filling it in. Perhaps what would be best if I send you an example and maybe you could just address it.
Yeah, you could.
After the fact, that would be awesome.
Yeah, and Adam, you can.
I'll share.
You can share my email address with the attendees, and
great.
If you have any questions, you can easily send me an email, and I'll try and help you. We'll figure out a sensible reason for doing it a certain way. Anyway.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Just before we close, then Warren looked it up. We get our clear plastic pages. They're 5 millimeter. They're labeled as 5 mil.
5M.
5M, which means 5 mil. They're actually labeled as clear covers. This is an opaque one, but ours are clear. But this is what they would be like. Mm-hmm. And we get them from Southwest Binding out of Calgary. Now, they only come in 8.5 by 11. So you have to watch the size of your book. Sometimes, those we can't get them in the larger sizes because they're designed as covers.
For those of you, and Bonnie, I could just add for this BC crowd, I can check in with our production staff here to see where we're sourcing them.
You probably have a source for them.
Yeah, I know that we definitely get all of our coils and all of our covers and everything from a certain vendor. So
and they should have the clear plastic pages as well.
Okay, so if I'll share that out in the follow-up notes to the meeting, which will be an email from me to all attendees with Bonnie's contact info and the slides. Before we wrap up, Bonnie, I just wanted to share in the chat here an example of some of the beautiful work that you've done recently with NNELS. Now I will not try to pronounce the book. This is how I know. Mm-hmm. This is you're
not gonna read the Assiniboine language for us?
I don't know if I would attempt it. I wouldn't even know where to start. But this is a beautiful book. It is a dual It is not only dual media, but it is dual language. And so Bonnie's done the Braille and the tactiles for this book. What's really nice is House of Anansi, the publisher, is making the print Braille version available at the same price as the print version. So really gorgeous work. Wanted to just share that link in the chat if people wanted to check that out. And just incidentally, yes, there will be copies coming to the PRCVI library very shortly, but feel free to grab your own.
I have 20 more on my desk waiting to be put together.
Awesome. Oh, wow. That's exciting.
We've already produced 20 and I've got 20 more to do, so.
Awesome. Well, some of those are coming to Vancouver, but I just would encourage others to check it out. The other thing I just want to mention before we sign off is a plug for our next webinar on May 7th. Seema from our team here at PRCVI is going to be doing a webinar on a similar format to this one on spatial arrangement. And so the registration for that will be coming in the follow-up message to this presentation. So you'll all be able to attend that. Bonnie, thank you so much for this. We are so grateful out here in BC for your expertise and for your support. And so on behalf of everyone, thank you so much. And thanks everyone who was here for coming.
Okay, and anyone that has a question that I didn't answer, just send me an email and we'll work it out together.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.